right, we can go ahead and get started. So thank you everybody for joining us today. In this webinar, we will dive into specific cyber threats that are impacting your business and share actionable steps that you can take today to improve your organization's security posture. So both from a standpoint of IT security as well as a financial standpoint with cyber liability insurance, improving your posture. But before we begin, I would like to say that we will be answering questions near the end of the presentation. So if you have any that come up, please feel free to send them through the chat feature that we have. You'll see a little chat bubble on the top of your screen. Just send any questions you have our way, and we'll try to get to all of them later on in the presentation. So our presenters today, we have Tim Taylor from Launchways, and then we have Michael Mask from Aqueity. So I will pass the torch on to Michael.
Hi everyone, good morning. We appreciate you joining us. As I look at the roster here, we've got a variety of different industries represented, and what we want to talk about today is obviously the cyber threats and what you can do to protect yourself on a couple of different fronts. So the first thing I want to get through are some fast facts, and essentially what we've seen now for numerous years is the increase of cyber attacks to the point of there's a cyber attack every 39 seconds. Over 54% of all organizations were hit by some type of ransomware in the past 12 months, and email is the #1 threat, with over 95% of all incidents being email-based. So just some kind of quick facts for everyone there. The next thing is, are you a target? We get this question all the time, especially in the small and mid-sized business community. And what I would say undoubtedly is yes, you are. And if anything, you may be more than an average target because oftentimes smaller or mid-sized businesses are seen as more vulnerable. It may be due to a lack of staff or a perceived lack of sophistication in their security environment where some of these cyber criminals will go ahead and target you. And then what does that mean? That doesn't mean we have to kind of cower in the corner and be afraid all the time, but it is important to understand the consequences. And later in this session, Tim will talk about some of those financial consequences, but there are also things like your reputation risk, the customer's trust in you, and the competitive disadvantage that happens if and when these threats become real and you're exposed to those. So we'll move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about some threats specifically that we're seeing. There's been over 2.3 million global users have been subject to ransomware in a period of a year from 2015 to 2016. And most of the ways that they come after you, I'll talk about the two most common ones. The first one is social engineering. And people may have heard some of these terms like phishing, executive whaling, or CEO fraud. Let me explain what those are. Phishing is really an attempt to get sensitive information out of you or your employees by pretending to be someone reputable. And we'll give an example here later. Executive whaling is really lasering in on senior people in your organization and attempting to target them specifically. The most profound example of that is the social engineering technique, which goes after CEOs. And we've got a recent example, a company we were working with, where they hacked into their system, they got the email of the CEO, they got the wire transfer process and how to go about that, they faked an email from the executive to his executive assistant, authorizing a wire transfer. This person went about making that wire transfer. Luckily, the bank had a control in place where if it was over a certain amount, they had to do a verbal approval, and they initiated a call back to the CEO and said, wait a second, I never did anything. So, these things are real. They're not just stories. And this is an organization that does pay attention to this, but they were subject to it because the crooks have gotten a little more sophisticated. So in addition to that social engineering, the other thing we see quite a bit is ransomware. And what happens here is, somebody breaks in, they lock your stuff down, and they say, if you want it back, give us something. And by something, it's often Bitcoin, some type of fee, and it really puts you in a very difficult position where you're either kind of paying this extortion or you're trying to fight it. It forces you to invoke your business continuity and say, well, what do we have backed up? And really just spend a lot of time in cycles dealing with a third party that you do not want to be dealing with. So those are two of the primary cyber threats that we see in terms of the most common ones. I want to give you an example next, and the first real-world example is one that maybe many of you have experienced, and if not, I just want to sensitize you to this. The first one is Microsoft phishing emails. So these often come from companies that you're very familiar with. It'll be Microsoft, it'll be Amazon, it'll be FedEx, it'll be a vendor you do business with, and obviously it's not really those companies, but they do a good job of cloaking themselves. And everyone's busy, people are on their phone, they're on the move, and there's usually a call to action, which is somewhat compelling. We've seen many people fall for these over time, both in their work environment and their home environment. And what that does is they're all trying to kind of lure you into giving all or some of your personal information. What happens is once that goes down, you immediately are compromised and you enter into this unknown. And what I'd say is that's real important for people on the call is you don't know. And oftentimes, many of the people who join a webinar like this are in a position of leadership in your company. You may have an employee who went through this exercise and they really thought they were talking to Microsoft, and it never comes up, it never crosses their mind, but they've been compromised. Conversely, sometimes what happens is people will be suspicious, but they're embarrassed or concerned about their job or not sure how to handle it. And while they may have a thought that something wasn't right, they keep a lid on it and don't share that. So one of the things we'll talk about later is some techniques to combat this with training, awareness, and kind of building a security culture in your company. Okay, the next example that I'd like to talk about is a Outlook flaw. And what this is basically everyone who's using the Microsoft Outlook email package. This happened as recently as May 2018. And what was happening is hackers were trying to steal your Windows login credentials. And this is a little more sophisticated attack where instead of you leaving your environment, punching your data into an unknown website, this one was just as simple. When you previewed that, the attacker was able to make a connection and remotely look at your email information. So again, this is pretty benign in terms of a user didn't step into trouble or take action that was negative. This is where they came kind of right after you and did that. So just a couple of quick examples. Unfortunately, we could talk all day about the examples in social engineering and ransomware, but I want to just touch on these. Some of you may have seen these before. If not, be on the lookout. And sometimes those statistics scare us. The high vulnerability scares us. So one of the things we want to talk about is where do we start? And there's two parts of this puzzle. There's the part that I'm going to speak to here this morning, and then Tim will as well. And when you talk about IT security, the first step is where are you? And it's not unlike going to a doctor where, they look at your height, weight, BMI, blood pressure. They check you out for your current fitness and wellness. You can do the same kind of thing with IT security. So there's a variety of diagnostics and reviews and monitoring devices you can kind of put on the environment to understand, here's where we're at. Here's what's vulnerable. So that's the first piece of the puzzle, and we'll talk later in the program about how we can help you on that front. The next piece is threat management. So now that these threats are out here, you've done that kind of check your pulse and you know where you're at, how do you manage threats? And really it comes down to an ability to identify those threats and an ability to manage them if they manifest themselves. So, getting smart, creating some alerts that will let you know that something's transpired, and then making sure that you mitigate and manage those incidents. So that's usually kind of the second piece of the journey, with the third piece being a proactive monitoring. And that's really kind of going on the offensive. The first two are more defensive postures. The proactive piece of this is being more offensive, and you're training your people. You're putting in software packages to monitor and alert your environment. You're constantly being conscious of what are the new threats, patching your environment, connecting with experts in this field, and really boosting your defenses in a way that doesn't completely inoculate you from this problem, but it puts you in a position where you sleep a little bit easier at night, and then you can go and have a conversation with someone like Tim at Launchways about how do I further protect myself once I take the basic measures. How can I protect myself? And with that, what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Tim to talk a little bit about if you're not protected, what some of the financial impacts and consequences of an attack are.
Michael, thanks for explaining everything and turning that over to me. So I want to talk about the financial side of things and what happens in the event of one of these things happening to you guys. As your companies continue to grow, you want to make sure that you're in a good financial position, and one of these events can really significantly impact your bottom line and also your reputation. So one example Michael talked about was a ransomware attack, and that actually happened to one of our clients. And what happened was the employee clicked on a link in the email, and unknowing to them, malware software downloaded on the company server and encrypted all the information. So the next thing that happened was the individual that hacked in wanted $20,000 paid in Bitcoin in the next 48 hours in order to give them that key to get their information back. Some of the things that were going to be assessed in this situation, there'd be $14,000 that they had to pay for IT consulting to see what kind of backup capabilities they had in the event they could not get that information back. They had to have a forensic investigator go out to locate where the malware was, the impact that it had, and how much it impacted the company, so what areas was covered, and then also making sure that going forward that they close that gap, along with legal consulting and incident management reports. So all that totaled about $60,000 worth of damage to that one individual, and that was even with the company not paying anything out when it came to a data breach, when it came to notifying other individuals that had been hacked, because the information ended up in this case not getting out to the public. So that you can see for $60,000 was a really small incident where someone just clicked on an email, and you could see how costly that was. So important to make sure that you have a cyber insurance policy that's going to cover those damages. So if you go to the next screen, that shows you a little bit more in terms of what cyber insurance is. So some of those things that I listed were all covered by the insurance policies, and particularly the cyber insurance policy. And there would be 7 or 8 different sub-coverages that you have to purchase. So just making sure that there are those incident response expenses, cyber extortion, data asset loss coverage, all of those are all in one cyber liability policy, but making sure that you're partnering with the right person to make sure that all those coverages are in there, because when a data breach or when a cyber breach does happen, there's more than just one little coverage that's going to apply in these cases. So a second quick scenario is actually a scenario where a company was hacked. They had no idea. It was a law firm that we work with, about 150 lawyers that worked there. They had sensitive information. So they got a phone call saying, hey, all this information has been taken, and they weren't sure if it actually happened. They just said, hey, they got a phone call. What do we do? So in this case, they did have the cyber liability insurance in place, so it cost about $44,000 to have a forensic investigation take place to make sure that it actually the breach actually did happen, which it did. Locate where it was vulnerable on, how was it going to impact the client, and then calculating the extent of the loss. So in addition to that, public relations expert had to be hired. That was another $12,000. Legal fees was another $28,000. And this individual that called wanted an extortion payment of $25,000. In this case, since it hadn't been made public, they were threatening to take it to the black market. They actually went ahead and paid that as part of it, but all told, all these additional fees and the lawsuit that ended up settling for $100,000 ended up costing this company $243,000. And like I mentioned, in this case, they had a cyber liability and policy in place, and it was ended up being covered. So the financial impact to them was minimal, but their reputation and things of that nature did take a significant hit. So making sure that that coverage is also in play there. So when you do lose some clients or some revenue from that there's liability insurance to protect you in that. So what specifically does it cover? I know I mentioned some of those things over the phone, but if you go to the next screen, this kind of gives you a little bit broader overview of what it's going to cover. It's going to cover you notification-wise to cover the cost to notify your clients or any potential prospects that their information might have been hacked, credit monitoring for those clients that have been hacked, the legal fees, the fines and penalties that you might get from the state and local governments depending upon the size and severity of the attack. Like I mentioned earlier, the business interruption insurance. So that portion is going to kick in and actually pay for the time that you're not able to do business in the event that you're down for 3 or 4 days and no one can access computers and your systems. And then the cyber extortion piece, sometimes that can get misconstrued in the fact that you will want to, hey, just pay this $10,000 and hopefully everything will get sent back. That's actually not the best way to go. The best way is to have a forensic review and make sure that what information they're saying they have, they actually do have it. And then if they do actually have that information, making sure you mitigate that. And then the cyber extortion is really a last-ditch effort to make sure that they're not going to release the information because they can still take that money and release the information to the public. So that's, in a nutshell, some of the major coverages on the cyber liability side, and then I'll kind of turn it over to Michael to talk about how you can prevent that from happening. Obviously, nothing's foolproof, so that's why you kind of need both here, but I'll turn it back over to Michael, and he can talk a little bit more detail on how to protect you from something like this.
Thank you, Tim. And what is important is that the combination of these are really the key to protecting your corporate value and your business's value. So, one of the things on the IT side, as I referenced earlier, is prevention. There are different techniques we can employ. One of the primary ones is putting in anti-malware, antivirus type software, so you're less likely to get attacked. As I referenced earlier, email is one of the greatest vulnerabilities that you have. There are a number of configurations you can do in all the common email packages, as well as there's some bolt-ons that really can enhance your security when it comes to email. Denial of service protection. One of the things that happens often is if you maintain your own network, there's just a variety of people all day, every day, 24/7. They're just attacking networks, and they try to overwhelm your network. There's different kind of walls you can put up in terms of preventing that from happening in your organization that can be very cost effective. And, once they're in, you can check that off the list at one level and say, okay, we're protected there, and move on to another area of protection. One of the most prominent ones is training. I cannot stress enough how your first line of defense is your own employees, not only in recognizing what some of these threats are and mitigating them, but in avoiding getting you into trouble. We've seen dramatic increases in people's security posture who send their employees to training. What's nice is there's some very simple things out there that we use with our clients where you can do self-study training, simple videos. They're 3 minutes, 5 minutes. They hit a point and they make it well and it sinks in. One other thing we typically will do is we'll complement what's known as a simulated phishing test. So we'll either send fake emails, we can do fake voicemails, which is another common scheme that's going on now, and even a USB drive that we'll leave, let's say, in the break room. And we'll manage that experience. We'll test out your organization, And when people fail that test, we can route them immediately to training, and it can really scare you straight in terms of the impact that has and the education it has. So again, I just really want to emphasize, getting your folks educated is key. And then the last one is being prepared for incidents if and when they happen. And there's two parts of that. One is the part I'll talk about, and the other is the part that Tim already did speak about. If you don't have any, kind of fire escape plan, if your building's on fire, you would expect a big problem. But you can have a plan and do drills and a process, so if and when you get hit, and it's more likely when than if, you can execute that plan that's been agreed on and really streamline a very stressful time for yourself. So when we put this all together, as we kind of pop to the next slide, what this joint offering is really designed to do is give you that peace of mind. So if you take these practical steps to improve your IT security, and then you ensure yourself, if something happens after you try to secure yourself, you're going to, you'll be insured. It's a combo of those two things that really work in concert together. So with that, I want to turn it back to Tim to explain a little bit about Launchways.
Yep. So just a little bit on us. We provide strategic people solutions for growing companies. Right now we have over 450 now happy customers in the Chicagoland area, so we're based locally here. We do work with companies that have a local presence here, but also have satellite offices or other offices in other states. And then we help make sure that we align their people and operations with the long-term growth of the company. And some of our solutions is business insurance, human resources, employee benefits, and payroll. And Michael, if you want to talk a little bit more on Aqueity.
Sure. Thank you. Aqueity is all access IT solutions firm with a focus on security. We've been helping growing businesses in Chicago since 1996. Now, our whole job is to be extraordinary. And by that, it's really not only helping you with these problems, but educating you. Bringing subject matter expertise to bear so that security, which is the foundation of our efforts, becomes kind of part and parcel and the foundation of your organizations. And again, it's that IT expertise, that security work that we're doing, and then ultimately making sure that everything lines up with your business. Because while this could look like an IT science project or an insurance project, it really just is something that fits in with your strategic objectives and how you go about just aligning the insurance piece, the IT security piece with what you're trying to achieve in all of your company objectives.
All right.
Well, so with
thank you guys. Go ahead.
So with that, let's open it up to some questions from the group. I know we've got some coming in from the chat, and we can have people either chat or we can have you ask over the phone.
Yeah, please send any questions that you have. It looks like the first one that we can go to is, what does cyber insurance cost? I'll pass that one right on over to Tim.
Yeah, so cyber liability insurance can cost anywhere as little as about $1,200 and sometimes as high as about $3,500, and it really depends on the number of computers you have, and then the biggest portion is the number of safety procedures and protocols that you have in place to protect those things. So all the things Michael was talking about earlier help drive down those costs, and if you don't have them in place, you're more vulnerable, so therefore the insurance companies are going to charge you a higher premium. And those costs, we usually recommend at least a $1 million limit of coverage, so that range is going to give you a pretty good bang for your buck, and the better you can do to protect yourself beforehand, the less the insurance premium will be going forward.
Awesome. Okay. Moving on, we have, what's included in a threat assessment? Michael, could you answer that one?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Typically what we look at is we look at the people, the process, and the technology aspects of your company. And we'll go through each of those, and we've got a multi-step diagnostic where we'll try to understand, as I mentioned earlier, on the people side, what is the current knowledge level of the threats and the training. bring people up to speed on that. We try to assess where you're at. On the technology side, we're obviously looking at the date of your hardware, software, network. We can do things like sample penetration testing to see how vulnerable you are as we work our way through there. And then from a process standpoint, where does security fit in people's prioritization? Oftentimes you've got a set of legacy systems that were put in maybe in a kind of a fast mode or in a high growth mode, or maybe you've bought a company and, oftentimes the process of security is not that well thought out. We oftentimes see people with multiple tools that do the same thing, one tool that they're, buying but not using or not using appropriately. So we go through, in all, it's about a 50-plus point diagnostic check on those three areas. And the whole result of that is a heat map that maps the risks that you face. And then, obviously we would go through that heat map and for the high risks, help you try to mitigate those.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see. We have how easily could you roll out a solution? And I'm not 100% sure if this is in regards to a cyber liability insurance solution or an IT security solution, but I guess we can both touch on each area.
Yeah, from the cyber liability side, we do an assessment on our end, just asking what specifically there's about 20 questions that we ask that the insurance companies are going to want to see if you have the right policies and procedures in place when it comes to an awareness plan. What are you doing on the front end, and what are you going to do on the back end in the event a breach occurs, so they make sure that they're limiting their exposure. So we do a complimentary risk assessment to walk through our clients each and every time we start working with them. So that's what we do on the Launchways side. Michael, you want to go into what Aqueity does?
Yeah, definitely. What we do is it's a process that can begin in as little as a week, and oftentimes post the assessment, what we do is we'll do a 2 to 3 week project effort to do the immediate high priority items, and then from there we get into a monthly rhythm, and it's like a managed service typically, where after we create that roadmap, we do the high priority items. You can just check off the list each month what's most important to you as you enhance that security posture.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we've gotten to all of the questions. So the last
Can we open up the phone? Can we open up the phone lines real quick and see if anyone else has one they would like to ask on the phone?
Yeah, sure. We could do that. In 1 minute.
So always a risk if somebody's in a cab or an airplane or driving. But I wanted to see if anyone out there had any questions that they weren't able to submit in the chat. Okay. So with that, let's move to the next step. And what we have, everyone, is an offer for everyone who's attended this webinar. We've got an excess, I think, of 25 people or so who've joined us today. And it's a complimentary cyber risk assessment, and it will cover both parts. It'll cover the part that Tim has referenced all session in terms of the insurance angle, as well as that heat map exercise that I mentioned on your current state of your IT security. So for those of you that are interested, please let us know. You can reach out. We'll provide some contact information here to let you engage with us, and we can help you take those first steps.
Yes, everyone will receive an email by the end of this week that contains the recording of this webinar in case you'd like to rewatch it, as well as contact information in case you would like to sign up for this cyber risk assessment. So I guess that about wraps it up. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good one.
Thank you.